Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. So, amongst all of the talk surrounding the NBA Finals and everything that has been taking place, we have seen Jrue Holiday emerge in a massive way in terms of his role on the Celtics team that is in large part, you can say unproven. They've been on many deep postseason runs, but came up short a number of times, at least short of the NBA Finals. And it seemed like a lot of people were sort of doubting whether or not this team had the mental makeup in order to win the finals, and especially when they trade Marcus Smart during the offseason as well in a different trade than for Jrue Holiday here. But there was a worry that they wouldn't have that leadership, that heart, that toughness, everything that was needed to win a championship. And Jrue Holiday, though he hasn't been quite as vocal as Marcus Smart during those runs, he has been basically everything that Marcus Smart has looked out to be. But I do believe that there has been a little bit more sacrifice and a willingness to sort of fall in line in the role that he plays. And last night we've seen a number of occasions here in the postseason so far where he has asserted himself when he's needed to. And no, he's not necessarily a player on the offensive side of the ball that can day in, day out be the go-to scorer, but in that Pacers series, understanding that Tyrese Halliburton was his matchup and that he can take advantage, he did during those games. And last night was another example with his 26 points of how impactful he has been for the Celtics team, along with the fact that he has been, an all-world defender against Luka and Kyrie up to this point. So I want to sort of look back briefly at the Milwaukee Bucks and the turnover that they chose to roll with during the offseason, where last year they were upset by the Miami Heat in the first round. They were the 1 seed, the Heat were the 8 seed. Now, I continuously say I believe that series would have played out differently if Giannis wasn't injured for the majority of it. And there is some degree of overreaction, but at the same time, the Bucks organization was in a place last offseason where they sort of had to prove themselves to Giannis, because Giannis had increasingly been speaking out to the media about the idea of he could look to play somewhere else. And not that he ever definitively said he wants to go anywhere. He put out those nuggets about how he wants to make sure he is giving his all as somebody who plays with, every ounce of heart that he has out on the court, that he wants to be playing for an organization that mirrors that same philosophy of going all out. So I thought that the Bucks were in a position where they had to prove themselves a little bit to their star player. And that's what they did with the investments into going out and getting another co-star in Damian Lillard. But of course, part of that deal required them to move on from Jrue Holiday, a massive part of their 2021 NBA championship, along with a number of other assets. Grayson Allen out in that deal as well, who Allen, obviously not the flashiest player in the world necessarily, but led the NBA in 3-point percent shooting this past year, was a very passable defender, as we saw the Bucks really struggled on the perimeter with their defense this season, losing their top two point of attack defenders, and obviously Chris Middleton still sort of working back from injuries. Maybe that's something that he can still recover, because he was pretty elite defensively when he was fully healthy, but we obviously haven't seen that from him really since the 2021 playoffs. But losing Jrue and Grayson Allen in that sense, ultimately they do also move off of an unprotected, I believe it was, 2029 first round pick and pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. Ultimately, I don't necessarily ding them at all for that, because that you're in an instance where you want to show your star player that you are concerned about winning right now, and you think that you have some type of a window available to you in this Eastern Conference that we've been talking about it throughout the entirety of the Celtics postseason run, that the Eastern Conference is wide open for the most part. Really, headed into the season, it was seen as the Celtics and the Bucks. Maybe there was still a little bit of buzz left over about the Heat coming off of their improbable finals run. Maybe the Knicks put things together, which they did to some degree, before injuries really caught up with them in the postseason. But this was an opportunity the Bucks felt like, players like of the stature of Damian Lillard don't come around often. But again, in all of this conversation, that move in a vacuum, again, I think that the Bucks run it back again. Losing Jrue Holiday is extremely tough, but you are hoping to, make sure that your star is happy. I'm curious though whether or not the Bucks really reconsider that if they knew that Jrue Holiday was going to make his way to the Celtics, your number one contender in the Eastern Conference, because obviously the Bucks know how good of a player Jrue Holiday is, and there has been some unhappiness from certain fans in the Bucks fan base, where all fan bases have those types of people, but a little bit of a frustration from some Bucks fans that Jrue Holiday wasn't able to be the offensive creator that they maybe needed him to, especially when Chris Middleton was dealing with that injury. But ultimately, would they... I really wonder whether or not this would have been a much deeper conversation if the Bucks knew that the Celtics were going to get Jrue, understanding that in a supplementary role and as somebody who doesn't have to be the game in, game out offensive creator, that he can fit perfectly into a system. And the Celtics obviously had all of these assets to potentially go out and make a move. And ultimately, when the Celtics traded for Jrue Holiday, it wasn't very much that they had to give up for Jrue. I can go back here and double check, but it was Malcolm Brogdon, the reigning Rookie of the Year, or a Sixth Man of the Year, I should say, who was dealing with injuries throughout the postseason. That's unfortunately been a massive part of the Malcolm Brogdon story. Robert Williams, who is a promising young big, and a couple first-round picks, one of which I believe they got from the Kristaps Porzingis trade, where you look at the masterclass that Brad Stevens has done throughout the past offseason. The fact that they acquired 2 first-round picks alongside Kristaps Porzingis for Marcus Smart was just an unreal job on his end. And then, again, working Jrue Holiday into this system as well without having to give up all too much as well. Brad Stevens, I believe Bob Myers on the post-game show on ESPN last night said that Brad Stevens was the finals MVP so far. Now, obviously, a little bit of a joke, but I mean, we've seen these role players that he went out and acquired play massively impactful minutes for the Celtics so far in this run. And again, when you want to tie it back to this conversation about the Bucks and Jrue Holiday, I don't think that they make the move if they know that Jrue is going to go to their number one contender. Again, I understand the politics, especially you talk about in the NBA, of how difficult it is to retain star players, franchise players in today's era, especially when, the national media, I definitely have sympathy for Bucks fans who have had to deal with the national media sort of trying to pry Giannis away from the Bucks and into a bigger market, despite the fact that Giannis has seemed perfectly happy in Milwaukee. But, the Bucks were definitely feeling pressure, it looked like, during these off seasons, and ultimately they made a move to try and keep him committed there. He ends up re-signing, so mission accomplished on that end, but it definitely may have hurt them in the long run. So let me know your thoughts. Again, this is, a little bit subjective, and we're talking about a one-season sample size. I expect Lillard and Giannis to have a much better rapport next season. Really curious to see. I think if that two-man game really gets going, it can be one of the most unstoppable plays in the NBA. But we didn't see it in year one. Maybe we see it next year. let me know your thoughts. But we're going to be taking our final break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to move from basketball to hockey, talking about the Stanley Cup Finals that took place on Saturday night and breaking down that game, what it means for the series moving forward. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.